creamy.
They say we should have known better than to fall so deep down into this rabbit hole we found. And I was thinking,
hi, this is Nico. You're listening to my dad Rafal, also known as the White Rabbit, and James Jardine on the one and only Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. Buckle up and enjoy.
deep into this pool of regrettable situations. Pitch black, think back to the last time that we were happy.
All right. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, good night. I don't know, wherever you are in the world, thanks for listening. Some of you guys that decide you can try to tune in live, hopefully you're in. Didn't have to wait too long while Erik figured out how to use computers. This is episode 623 of the podcast. But I figured I'd let you listen live as we stream, guys, because this is going to be really fun. Mr. Bloch here has been on a hell of a tear lately on LinkedIn of things that if I agree with any more, I'll be saying them. And I know Anton's got some things to say about SOC because he's done a thing or two. And then, James, Jim, you guys, I'm sure you guys have comments as well. Jim, I know you do. So I'm gonna yield the floor to you. I love the shirt, by the way. That's an awesome shirt.
It's my fighting shirt. I'm actually very curious about where this is kind of going overall because I'm actually a kind of a metric guy. But I think if you don't do them right, I used to always say is inspect what you expect, but expect what you measure, right? So if you don't measure correctly, you'll get curvatures in your performance, and it kind of creates a delta on those kind of things. So, but I'm really curious because I've had a chance to sort of, let's say, bone up on Erik's posts, let's say. So I'm really, really excited about this one. This is gonna be good.
All right, Erik, why don't you set the tone, man? So, all right, if you guys don't know, quick, Erik, introduce yourself real fast because I think everybody knows you, but if they don't.
Okay. Well, hello, I'm Erik Bloch. I've been in security for just over 30 years, security operations, about 20 years. And now that I have all this experience under my belt, I guess we'd call sharing it with everybody. Take that however you want to, so.
Angry man yells at cloud. That's Anton. Anton, hi.
Hey, sure, SOC metrics, right? This is like one of the fun ones. And of course, this is the topic where I have to go through some yellowed notes from 10 years ago and say, what was the wisdom I had on this that I wrote 10 years ago? And it's probably still current. So we'll see.
Yeah, all of this is current. So this all started with some LinkedIn posts, and I've linked them back in the I'll link them in the show notes, but I linked them back on the LinkedIn post where I announced this show. Erik and I've been doing some light research on a couple of days ago on how to effectively measure something that for the day job that my customers will care about, right? In terms of like, hey, you've got a new security tool. By the way, if you're a vendor, you should care about this. Hey, customer, we sold you a new security tool. Like, what is it doing for you and how is it delivering value? It turns out it's really hard to answer that question. And so I'm talking to people that know this stuff, and then I've got my own ideas. And then Erik and I got on the phone for a couple of minutes, and about 20 minutes in, I'm like, stop talking to me to record this because this is awesome. So the background is a lot of the metrics that we are paraded, that we are shown, that are populate our dashboards are, I think, Erik, you would say bullshit?
Most of them, yeah. Because we don't know what else to do, right? So we Google it, and it comes up with the same tired metrics we've had for 20 years. And people are like, yep, just put some lipstick on that and slap it up there, and that's our metrics, right? And nobody understands what we're supposed to be really doing. Like, what's the business outcomes we're delivering to the company? Does anybody know? No, we just know we're doing work, right? We just continue to grind, doing what we're told without having any idea of, are we actually delivering value to the business, and how do we measure that value to the business? We have no clue. And you ask the vendor, like, hey, how do I prove your tool is doing XYZ that you sold to me for? And their eyes glaze over. They have no idea either.
So we got to a point where, and this I think where we stopped is where I think the things you take issue with are similar ones that I take issue with, but I don't think I've had better alternatives in the last decade or so, which is mean time to resolve, mean time to investigate, MTTR, MTTI, like all those interesting mean time to. Yeah. And so tell me why you don't like those, or tell the nice people why you don't like those.
Well, first, like, they're not actionable. It's information. It's like saying it's hot outside. Thank you. Right? You can't do anything with that. And I made the analogy to you when we were on the phone, where I went to my former CISO. I'm like, hey, look, my team handled 2,000 alerts last month. Right? Oh my God, Eric! Like, should I fire you or promote you? Because I have no idea what that means. I'm like, well, of course you don't. Like, duh, I haven't given you any context. I feel like an idiot, right? So you have to work on kind of reframing these metrics to give them something that actually makes sense, that's actionable. And that's the hard part we're all kind of struggling with now. Like again, in my last couple roles, we used some platforms that had scheduled detections that fired every 4, 6, 8 hours, whatever it was. And shockingly enough, when I looked at my team's mean time to detect, it was 4, 6, 8 hours. Nonstop. I mean, why are we measuring this? We're measuring that, yes, Splunk has fired the searches every couple hours, right? Or the search didn't finish because it ran too long, one of the two. But I mean, again, this data, it's nice to have, I guess, but it provides no value, and it's not actionable at all. There's nothing we can do with it.
It is literally measuring the weather.
Yeah.
Correct. But it's obviously useful to measure the weather. I think that you want to know, you can possibly predict the weather in some way. I am similarly negative on these, but I'm also careful. What I'm trying to say is that I do want to measure the temperature outside, and I do want to have the metrics that may mean something, but I would not necessarily act on them. Moreover, I've seen people who fail very badly when they try to act on them, basically by flogging the analysts to respond faster. And of course, they respond faster by clicking OK on every alert. So I think that MTTD specifically, if you turn it to actionable metrics, you would likely fail. But it's still a good metric about the weather, because you do know whether you're in North Carolina and there is a hurricane, or whether you are in the desert and there hasn't been rain for 200 days. So like, it kind of matters, but not for the reasons people think, right?
Well, okay, let's build on that for a second and think about the history of weather helps us predict what we might be able to produce in farmland or something like the best use of soil. Okay. But the problem is we're treating that metric equally to other metrics. What we need to do is recognize these weather metrics are inputs to other metrics. Like, how do we synthesize this information to draw out a, the God mode metric, right? So how can we come back and say, this is the impact of compliance risk into the business, and here are the feeder metrics that I'm able to collect out of my environment. And then I use, my brain and try to pull them together. But I think we sort of stopped at the first ones because the technology answered those. Is that a fair thing to say, Eric and Anton?
I mean, we've been leaning on the technology. We've been leaning on other people to provide us information, because again, we don't know what we need right now, right? Because we don't fully understand, again, what are the outcomes we're supposed to be delivering to the business? Like, do we even know what we're outputting to the business to begin with? And if we did, what does effective look like for your business? Like, what would an effective SOC or security operations function actually do at your business? And as we all know, like, security operations teams, like IR plans, they're all bespoke to every company. Every company does it different. They're hoping the outcomes are the same, but everybody, it's like cutting something with pearls, 1,000 ways to hang yourself with it. And as we see, every company does it their own special way. Their own unique snowflake. And so how do you standardize on what are the outcomes we're supposed to do to the business? And then how do we measure those outcomes? And what I've found through my experience is, like, to my earlier point, it's custom to every company. Like, the outcomes you want to deliver are the same. How you're getting there is different. Therefore, the data points you have to measure to actually assess if you're delivering the outcomes you want are also different. That's why there's no metrics product out there that just you plug in, it just tells you everything. Because again, everything's bespoke. This is why people use, Power BI or Tableau or something like that, or Excel spreadsheets to make up metrics. Because again, it's bespoke to every company.
So before sorry for jumping in, but like you're assuming that the only metrics that are useful are connected to business, but like I'm looking at some materials from the internal DNR team, and there's a pipeline latency metric that they really like. And if the pipeline latency goes above some number, then certain things happen. But it has nothing to do with value for the business, but it's still very useful. If there's some kind of a river of logs flowing, and every log flows in 3 milliseconds, and this one log taken 7, or some, it's actionable, it's a metric, but it's like very low level. These exist, and these are more universal. They don't have to be connected to the business, right?
Well, that's totally true. I mean, if you're that mature of an organization where you have your own data pipeline set up, like we did at Salesforce, of course, you want to make sure they're resilient. You want to make sure you're measuring that all the data is going through, and it's no one's tampering with it or whatnot. But that happens at scale, right? Most shops, even when I was with smaller shops, like we don't have the ability to do that. So it's totally true. Like you have those operational metrics that show, again, that you're measuring the weather of your pipeline. It's 70 degrees every day. If it ever becomes 1,000 degrees, something's wrong.
Yeah, so I put things into, Jim. This is the school of, I think I learned this stuff from you when we did this together. But there are 3 categories of things that I'd want to measure, and this goes back all the way back into my engineering job back at General Electric. Like we measured one of them, and over the years we tried to get more. At the bottom are the internal things that power my security team functioning to an acceptable or within parameters, whatever within parameters means, right? Anton, I think it's to your point to like, hey, did the log volume from my devices suddenly drop by 75%? Like that could be a bad thing, right? The second one is how effective or efficient is the process or the group of processes that power my security operations. And then on top of that does that actually impact the business positively or negatively? Does that pyramid make sense?
I mean,
yes.
But from a high level, yes.
Yes. From a high level, yes. Thank you. That's what I wanted to say.
Yeah.
So at that. So look at this is I think where us vendors need to understand what we are capable of doing versus where we try to overreach. I think us as vendors, right? I'll speak for myself. We need to be able to provide our things functioning within parameters, right? So you tell me what within parameters means, and I'll tell you, right? Am I getting the same rate of data? Are all of the automation components working, within some API response tolerance time frame or something, right? So is the stuff around me working? And if it goes, if some number goes too high, hey, the latency, there's a backlog in the SIM, well, that's a problem. Or hey, the IDS suddenly saw 75% less packets, and we're quiet. Like, hey, maybe somebody pulled the network cable out. So I think that stuff is doable. Where it gets a little harder is, I think,
doesn't that still rely on though people having good baselines to understand what their
so that's the catch,
stuff
right?
looks like, right? Like that's where people struggle. I mean, you can say, hey, you got to tell me the parameters, but I think people struggle with those parameters.
But I think I can suggest those parameters, right? Like I can suggest based on the size of the customer, their SOC, their number of people they have, the other tools. Like I can suggest a fairly good band within which to operate, small, medium, and large, let's say. Where I don't really have great insight is in the and so that's the bottom level. I think I can help with the top level, not as a tools vendor, but as somebody who's done this for a minute, right? Like I can start giving you like, hey, business value metrics. They're a little harder, but we can kind of figure out what those could be. The part, Eric, that I don't think I know, I certainly don't know, and I think this is the part where you got you kind of got hot about is how do we know whether the security operations function, the SOC, is actually operating efficiently versus just stuffing, like Anton said, clicking OK as fast as possible, right? What does that mean? How do we operate effectively and efficiently on one side without burning people out, right? And on the other without just like, yep, okay, ignore.
Yeah.
Somewhere in between there. But what the hell do you measure in there?
And also, minor caveat, and we need to answer it without too many it depenses. Because Erik had a great
Right.
point about it being very connected to the company mission, company realities. And I think that with a lot of it depends, it becomes much easier to answer. But we want a more generic answer that's still useful. I think that's a possibly useful caveat.
I'll tell you, I totally agree with that, Anton. I mean, to wave your hands and kind of give ambiguous answers doesn't help anybody. Hence why at the last couple of shops I've been at, I've actually dug in to build the things, right? Even though if it was bespoke to every company I was at, I still had kind of the high level objectives of showing what is the SOC doing? What are the outcomes we're delivering? And they're measuring those outcomes via, the volume, how much work, basically how it's measuring work. Like you want to see everything going into your SOC, everything coming out of your SOC at the other side, right? Where are all the tickets and all the work coming from? You have your machine-based detections, you have your EDR systems, your NDR systems, your endpoint systems, your CNAP systems, whatever else you have, making machine-based noise, which is a lot of. And then you have your human-based noise as well, which is half for enterprise SOCs. If you're MSSP, don't do this. If you're an enterprise SOC, half of your work is dealing with your employees. I got phished. My VPN doesn't work. I need to change my password, right? And you're redirecting that traffic other places. Your SOC is like a tier one, almost like an IT help desk, but for security nowadays, because they are handling all of the things. It becomes like your default dumping ground. At that point, let's start measuring the work they're doing. What is all the stuff coming in? Where's it coming from? And what's the actual outcome they're delivering? Are they resolving the cases? Are they giving these cases to other teams? Like, hey, here's a password to IT, here's a vulnerability to engineering. Are they escalating things to your CERT team to actually do investigations on? Are they, saying, hey, this is a false positive. I need to send this back to my detection team to tune the detection. Like measuring all of these workflows, measuring the outcomes, and then saying, okay, based on the number of tickets we've processed, this is the volume of work we're doing for all these things.
Yep.
And then mapping it, if you're measuring not just mean time to respond, hopefully you're measuring the stages of triage. Like, hey, they have an hour SLA, say, to get that ticket from the queue and make a decision whether this is legit and I need to do something with it, or it's crap and I can pass it, right? Measuring every stage of this process to actually see where the bottlenecks are. So if you're missing your SLA or 1 hour SLA, 80% of the time, okay, there's your bottleneck. Why? It gives you the information to ask questions. If you're meeting the SLA, but there's still too much work coming at the other side, you can actually see, again, if you map all this out, where your problems are, like via time and volume. And again, this is like when I visualize this on my Sankey chart, it's something very easy to sit down with the CISO or the head of the SOC and say, look, this is what we're delivering. Is this what we should be delivering? Like, should we be doing all these things? Are there things we're missing that we're not doing? And then based on that work, you can start measuring your team utilization rates, right? So instead of me going to my CISO and saying, oh my God, I did 2,000 events last month, which mean nothing, I can go to him and say, hey, look, every day last month, my team was utilized over 100%. They were utilized at 130, 200, 150, being able to show that they're being ground in the dirt. Or vice versa, hey, they're operating at 60%. Maybe we can turn on DLP alerts. Maybe we can turn on insider threat alerts. Maybe we can add some more to the stack. But until you're measuring that, and can actually say, look, I have extra capacity to do extra work or I'm overworked. Until you can review the outcomes you're delivering to the business, you have no idea what you're doing. You're best guess, right?
Erik, what's the motivator though? Because I think a lot of companies, right? I mean, CISOs, and this is probably driven from above CISO down, right? They like the big numbers. We blocked 800 million attempts this month. We did like the 200,000 or the 2,000 are numbers that don't mean anything at our level, but above seem to carry some sort of weight, right? And so you're not getting the push down saying, hey, really, I'd love for you to do this. That it doesn't matter me and up, right? Type of thing. Like, is there something holding back there that says there's no driving factor for a SOC team to even do all this stuff because everybody's good with the status quo. Not that it's not going to make security better, but it's the status quo. Like people just
That's
stick
the
with
battle
it.
we're fighting today, right? We're fighting that status quo battle. We're fighting MTTD on scheduled searches. Because again, we're like the CISOs, I mean, bless their heart, and they do a really good job. I'm not trying to throw them under the bus, but often they're so far removed up the stack, they don't have a good idea what's going on. They're relying upon their leadership team. Like my CISO would come to me, Eric, what's happening in security operations? And if I don't have the data, I'm giving him my best guess, then he's going and running with my best guess, right? And when a VC or a Gartner or some research analyst goes and talks to them about what's your biggest problems, they are regurgitating your best guess plus whatever they've heard on the market from all their marketing and whatnot.
Right.
Which is often incorrect. Hence why we have all these vendors coming up with silver bullets that don't actually fix our problem. And so I'm the reverse. Like I've done this at my last 3 roles where I've brought these actionable metrics to our boards, to our CEOs and say, look, this is what it means. It's actionable. Do something about it. So like when I showed my team, a former team was doing 2,000 alerts a month. They're like, okay, big deal. When I came back and say, look, my team is being utilized between 130% and 200% every day of the week, they could do something about that. They said, Eric, reduce your scope, hire more people. There was a clear path forward on that. When I bring those things, when you make them actionable, bring them to the correct leadership or the correct the board. Hopefully, they're semi-smart since they're on the board or they're CEOs. They can understand what to do with these actionable metrics. Versus, again, I worked 2,000 events last month. They're like, yeah.
Can I ask a question? Because I think this is fundamental. I want to make sure that we're all standing in the same arena. Eric? If I asked you a very simple question, I want to know how you answer. What's the job of the SOC?
I draw the analogy to an IT help desk for security. It used
That's
to
what I was
be
thinking you'd say.
that's where all your IDS alarms went to, all that, all the machine-based noise got dumped to, and they kind of went through it all and looked for the bad stuff. But nowadays, it's like, and this has been true for Atlassian, Sprinkler, Salesforce, Cisco. The SOC becomes kind of the default dumping ground for all things security. I have a security question, don't know who to ask. I'm going to go to the SOC channel. I'm going to go to the help-security channel that's manned by my SOC people, my tier 1 responders, right? They're in there answering questions. We become the default dumping ground. Plus, we have to do all the machine-based detections. Plus, we're helping all the humans do things. Again, it's like a super help desk.
Anton, you made a stinky face. Why?
Yeah, it's the help desk analogy that we've been trying to sort of indicate that once this sneaks into your mind, you're kind of screwed because you would never modernize your SOC to anything more than a help desk, but for security. So the reason for cringing is, like Eric is correct, that there are many organizations, maybe a vast majority, where SOC is a descendant of the IT help desk or of NOC or combination thereof. And it's like the 1980s IT help desk / NOC vision copied to 2024. But ultimately, unless you burn it, you're stuck. At least that's my impression based on not only our experience, but experience of some clients, where that if you're in a help desk mindset, your SOC would get better or slightly better, but you would not really be different. That's the reason for cringing. But the facts are correct. Eric is pointing at the correct facts, that it is the reality at many organizations, that it is the help desky thingy.
Okay, so what do we, if we're talking about showing effectiveness of the thing, right? Because it's always been the bane of the people that I know that have run SOCs. The bane of their existence has always been, I need more resources, whatever those resources are. And somebody goes, but you guys are doing just fine, right? Why do you need more resources? And showing the relationship between some volume of work and some meaningful thing that somebody in a business leadership position says, that matters to me.
Can we hone in on that for a second? I think I'm struggling. Can we start with, Eric, when you say business outcome, can you summarize what you mean by that definition? Right. So you heard your definition of statement of work, or excuse me, statement of work, SOC, right? I had Sal in my head for some weird reason. can you just, in a very sort of elevator pitch, tell me what you mean by what is the business outcome of a SOC, and how do you triangulate that with the identity of a SOC that you and Anton were chatting about?
Yeah, I mean, the business outcomes, like these are the things that, the end result of kind of the SOC process. So some noise comes in, someone puts eyeballs on it. So they think, okay, this is something that has to, this is a legit alert, or this is a legit, thing. I have to do something with it. And what do they do with it? They give it to the IR team, or maybe they fix it themselves. They could, they tap something, send someone to some documentation, or they toss it over the fence to IT. There's the password, whatever it is. At the end of that workflow, when that ticket is closed, that is the business outcome. And what is that business outcome? Like, okay, engineering fixed the bug, IT shipped the password, I give them to documentation, the IR team did an investigation. Whatever the ultimate end goal is of that workflow is the outcome you're delivering. And this is the part that SOCs don't really track very well.
Who doesn't track very well?
The SOC. The ticketing system, that their ticketing or their process usually ends at, here's the thing that's not mine, I'm tossing it over the fence, right? And then they're like, on to the next ticket. At the same time, from having measured this the last 10 years, half of those things you toss over the fence never get seen again. They won't get worked on.
Right.
So
let me
clear on the business outcome. You think you're alleviating the risk. You think you're mitigating the risk. But half of these things you're passing off never get fixed. This has been universal for my last 3 roles.
Yeah, and it sounds like a PBX operator, right? Yeah. Like stuff's coming in and you're just plugging switches like, oh, this goes here, this goes there. Right.
And so the metric is how fast can you connect the two?
How fast can you connect it? Do you connect it to the right port? Right. Like, are you connecting to the right output? Although I wouldn't say that the outputs, once it goes past there, becomes a SOC output. Right. Like that's the engineering output, or that's the help desk output, or it's somebody else's. Did you get it to where it was supposed to be? Because you now at that point have no control over whether they continue forward with whatever that was that you sent them. Right.
You have no control, but you should still track it. And so, like my last couple of roles, we used Jira tickets, whatever. We'd have a Jira ticket, and when we pass it to somebody else, like IT, say we want to password reset, right? We tap in, open it with IT. Hey, change Joe Blow's password, please. This is what happened. Blah 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 blah. I will link my ticket to the IT ticket. I'll wrap an SLA around my ticket for whatever it is, a week, 7 days, whatever their SLA is to change the password. And if this ticket gets closed, the IT one, within 7 days, my ticket closes. If not, I'm going to have an SLA warning. I'm going to have a report about this. And when I started tracking this is how I started to discover that half the work tossed over the fence never got done. So in that case, is the SOC really doing their job? Half of those risks, right, that they relied upon you to fix aren't being fixed. Therefore, the business outcomes the SOC is delivering is not what the business expects.
Yes.
The business expects all these things are being fixed, right? But we're not tracking it, so we don't know.
Right, and that's why we had back in the days when you wrote the ASO paper, we had this bucket about how SOC should run influence operations on these other teams so that they, in fact, follow it. Yeah. This was kind of the reason why this was born, is that almost like you need a thermometer for measuring the SOC degree of influence. And if the influence is low, almost doesn't matter what you do. It's going to be screwed. But if the opposite is true, then a lot of the results are achieved even before SOC does something. Like the example we used was, of course, phishing. If SOC was the catalyst for improving phishing defenses, then stupid phishing alerts never come into a SOC because there are no stupid alerts, because there are no phishing. So, but that's run through kind of an influence from a SOC in that particular case. That's really hard to do, by the way, if somebody's asking, give me a 3-step instructions on this. But it can be done.
But it turns the SOC basically into vulnerability management at that sense, right? Where do you draw the line between, okay, application security vulnerabilities need to feed through the SOC. Like everything needs to feed through the SOC so that way the SOC can track holistically instead of we only get networky related events or we only get this or the phishing. How do you collect it all? Should all that stuff flow through?
It kind of comes back to your processes, right? I mean, yes, not everything will go through the SOC. You'll have your application security team running their tools and they're shoving vulnerabilities over there too. And I've found that it holds true for them too. Like at my last role, like we had a backlog of hundreds of thousands of vulnerabilities that we never tracked, and they came back to bite us. When we had some, nation states come after us, it was in the backlog, but we knew it existed, right? But we weren't tracking it for years to actually see these things were being done. And again, is your security team delivering the outcomes you expected them to? No. Why? We're not watching. Again, if we just toss a grenade over the fence and we hope it goes off, right? And we go, good job, pat ourselves in the back, get the next thing we're supposed to work on. We need to be tracking the things you throw over the wall to make sure that we want to be, you know, if we want to be.
And the question about the application security piece is more of should the SOC be that holistic, you know, from a vulnerability disclosure piece, right? Maybe that comes into the SOC, it gets routed. Why wouldn't we have everything? And the SOC is just saying, okay, I'm collecting the information from these AppSec tools, and maybe the route is to application security or whatever, but you're bringing it all in so that way the SOC is not missing out on the information that's sitting in all these other tools. Like AppSec's sitting over here by itself, and we've got all these scanners and we've got all this stuff, and they're scanning the same boxes as what everything else is scanning, but we're not, you know, this is that graph you've always talked about this, you know, like, hey, the NOC saw this, the SOC saw this, neither look dangerous by themselves, but together it's a problem.
I mean, even threat modeling example is even more AppSec, and I think that I've told it somebody as kind of a drive-by comment. And by the way, if you have threat model results, you should channel them into detection engineering so people can write detections based on threat modeling. And their minds were just blown. It's like it's kind of like logically it's a little obvious, right? And some of the top maturity shops do exactly that. But for them, it was like the parallel universe opened up. And it's like, oh my God. It's like, yeah, well, that's sort of like logical, right? You have a threat model. It indicates what can happen. And you need to write a rule or a log or some way to detect it, right? And they're like,
that's actually would be a really good metric, by the way. To be honest.
Yeah, I know, but it's all this elitist crap that we can spout nonstop, but it applies to 0.1% of the companies, right?
Can we? Because now that Eric, I feel like after you opened this up to the help desk comment, we went down into a like what we measure became completely arbitrary and extremely like one off to everybody. What about the very basic fundamental function of processing and triaging inbound alerts of some kind, decisioning and taking action? Like the core fundamental process of a SOC.
Yeah, first, you know, take the basic premise of that question. You have noise, you want to go to a SOC, they have to process it somehow, right?
Right. The funnel, right?
Yeah, funnel. Okay. First thing, before you get in front of a human, right, you have to, you know, ruthlessly prioritize what do you want to show them to begin with? Criticals and highs, you know, or different types of alerts from different types of platforms. Because again, like all the tools have criticals, highs, 0, 1, 2, whatever they rank it as, right? It's up to you to figure that out. Then it's up to you to figure out what alerts make sense for us to look at. At none of my roles in the last 10 years have we looked at more than 40% of all the noise that came through. We just you can't scale linearly with the amount of noise comes in. So you have to choose. What am I going to look at? And the stuff you don't look at, you just cross your fingers and hope it doesn't get you later, right? And so that process comes first. What are we going to look at? And often that's just someone's gut feeling. I think that's more important than this, right? Because you don't have any data or metrics to back up what's we want to deliver to the business. So you cross your fingers, you pick the 30 or 40% of the things you want to show them. Okay, those come in the front door. Everything else gets, you know, I don't know what you do. You open a ticket and close it to track it. You throw it in the bit bucket. I don't know. Every company's different what they do with the ones they don't look at, or they throw it into an S3 bucket, whatever. They do something with the stuff they don't look at. The things that do come through, those are the things you want to measure. Like you want to measure the work being done. So say again, it comes in front of them. You have some SOAR platform that enriches the alert, drops the ticket in front of them. They pull it out of the queue. They have an SLA wrapped around, say, an hour to triage the ticket to make a decision whether this is a legit thing I have to do something about, or is this crap? This is why it's crap. Once that hour is done, either the ticket's wrapped up because they've helped the person in the Slack channel, or they've made the alert. Okay, this is a true positive, benign, false positive, whatever it is. Or the other side of it is they have to escalate it to IR team, or maybe they're taking that third-party risk and sending it off to somebody to answer the questionnaire, or maybe they're opening it with IT. But these are the stages you want to measure. You want to measure, okay, when it comes in, how long did it take someone to pull it out of the queue? Once they pulled it out of the queue, do they have whatever the SLA is wrapped around it? Do they have an hour, 2 hours, whatever it is? Are they meeting that? And then what happens after they're done? right? When either they close the ticket out or they've given it to somebody else, whoever it is, escalated, different team, different organization, whatever it is, so you can continue to track where that risk is going. And again, once it gets past the SOC, right? Once you hand it off to IT or DevOps or engineering, it's kind of outside your control at that point. But you still can measure it so you can hold them accountable. Because again, the responsibility for mitigating that risk is with us. It's with the SOC team. So we need to hold them accountable for doing that. The only way we can do that is to measure, again, the business outcomes.
Yeah. Does it matter? I've always thought it was interesting to measure, and maybe we kind of focus on just this process for the remainder of our time here, because I think this one's solvable, right? Whereas the rest of this space is just very nebulous, and it becomes really hard to not just difficult, but just hard to conceptually try to make sense of it. So, of the process of detecting. In triaging and detecting badness, I've always thought it was interesting to track I don't know what this tells me necessarily, but I thought it was interesting. The total volume of alert, the volume that we triage, and then the volume that we let go, right? That ratio. That's always been interesting to me because
I let go for various reasons,
sure. Not just like ignore.
Don't care today. Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So, like Erik said, 40% top, and I think 40% is being real freaking generous.
Oh yeah, most places that's the max I've ever seen from a 60,000 person public company. Everyone else has been far below that.
I agree. So that said, what does that ratio tell us? The amount that you process over the total, and then the amount that you let go over the total, or some ratio there. Like, what does that actually tell us?
So, if I may offer a very brief comment on this, I know it's meant to, prod me into action, I guess. But so, long story why, but I've been kind of sitting here for a few days and thinking about alert fatigue. And this exact, why is alert fatigue something we've been struggling for 25 years in security? But I don't want to push my agenda on you, but I want to connect it to what you just said. When I thought about the alerts that kind of cause fatigue and ultimately don't produce the desired effects, there's sort of reasons for it, right? Like, we neglect something that's just false positive because this is a benign activity and the detection tool is just wrong. So there's also something that's generated for informational reasons. There's also benign. There's also I don't care today. So to me, I would try to analyze what is this bucket of stuff you discard. Not only to shrink it, but to sort of figure out what's in the bucket. For some people, this bucket is mostly FPs. So advices go left. But for other people, the bucket is mostly benigns that are generated just in case. They should go left. They should go different direction. So to me, this matters what those discarded alerts are. And this defines how you approach the SOC optimization efforts based on what this stuff is. I don't think there's a generic answer.
That's interesting.
Most shops, what I've seen.
Nice way to say it depends.
Yeah,
it depends, but on the specific criteria. It depends on the nature of this, and there's 3 choices, not infinite choices.
Yeah, most places I've been, because they're not as sophisticated as Google, they don't have the brain power to put into it. They're basically saying, "Hey, look, I'll look at criticals, highs, and some mediums. Low informational, you're out." Right? It doesn't matter again if maybe someone strings together 5 lows and you ignore them all, then they break in. That's one of the things you cross your fingers and hope doesn't happen.
Yeah.
Because again, most shops, I've tried to do some of this analysis that Anton's doing. Okay, why are we discarding these things? I'm working with some smart people like Josh Neal who are trying to actually go through statistical analysis to figure out how do we weed these out before we put them in front of a person? Because to your point, there are ways to do this. There are ways to cut down and actually more intelligently decide that, hey, look, these are the things we're not going to look at because reasons, right? Concrete, discrete reasons. And then there are ones that are just we're not going to look at them because we don't have the capacity. All the lows have to go out the window, right? So there are the 2 or 3 different directions you can take it with. And I pray every day that a tool comes out that allows us to do this, to get more intelligent around what we're not looking at versus me every day. Please don't get us. Please don't get us. Right? That's where I'm at. That's where everybody.
It's terribly ironic.
Yeah.
It's terribly ironic.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the metrics we've been talking about so far, which is the basis behind my original question earlier, is those are I might rub some feathers the wrong way here in a second, but those are really cost basis metrics, right? You're proving your value, right? So I have an intake and I'm proving to you by these metrics that you're getting your money's worth because we're handling this as needed determined by the business, right? That is the outcome. And you're using activity metrics to be able to express, like, for example, utilization, for example. But the elephant in the room, right, is you have no control at all over the flow of potentially bad things into your environment. So we recognize that we're just going to ignore that over there and just kind of focus on the highs for now, right? So from a business perspective, it creates a very weird dynamic because any given day, it could increase by 1,000%. And then the entire ability of the SOC goes to a net zero because it wasn't designed or engineered or built the capacity to handle 10 billion times more work, right? So this is kind of goes back to where we talk about needing more and more money in security, especially in operations centers, because we're just trying to get more bite of the apple that's coming at us, right? And we can't control it. So as that apple gets bigger and bigger, our bites get smaller and smaller. So your point, Eric, about I wish there was some way to help me understand a sort of triage just the flow itself. And what's interesting about that is actually another cost, right? So, it's mind-boggling to me because if you step way back, what we're really saying is, listen, we have no way of controlling how much is coming at us, period, full stop. So it's up to you, business, how much you want to pay to get what percentage of that unknown volume taken care of. I mean, it's really ultimately what's being said here.
And think about that, talking in the terms of business, like that's what we have to do. We have to articulate when it comes down to resources, money, what are we delivering? That is how the rest of the business units speak. When you go to the board meetings, like this is why, and I had this conversation with some VCs who sit on public companies, the CISO comes in and gets maybe 2 or 3 slides in 5 minutes. The CFO gets a half hour, head of sales gets a half hour, CTO gets a half hour. They're all coming there with actionable data. We move the needle this much. This is how much money we're going to make. This is how much product we're going to ship. These are how many customers we get coming in the door. When we go up there we have an MTTD of 4 hours and we do 2,000 alerts. And the board's like, thanks for coming, sit down, right? because we can't talk that language of business. And on the other side of that, like to your point, the apple continues to get bigger. We have no control over that. That's the definition of burnout. High responsibility, low control. And this is why our teams continue to get ground in and burned out, because we're not tracking utilization, because the flow keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. We keep dumping it on them, and we're not measuring, dude, are we making these guys work, 80 hours a week in their 40-hour shift? The answer is yes. But until we can show that, we can't do anything about it. I can't go to the board or the CEO and say, look, we're running at 200% capacity. I need to either shrink the things we're looking at or add capacity. There's no other option. But until
you're never going to get anybody that's going to say shrink. Like, I can't imagine somebody, either the CISO recommending or somebody at the top saying, go ahead and shrink what you're looking at, because that's like saying like, hey, the neighborhood, there's crime all over the neighborhood. And you're like, well, I can't look at all of the monitors. So people are like, all right, well, stop looking at the ones over there. Those people are on their own. Like, that doesn't make, that doesn't feel like it makes any sense, because I get it. But in the yester world, in the world where you had islands of on the similar networks, but disconnected systems, right? Things that didn't talk to each other, that was okay, right? Where you could say that system is low risk, I'm not going to look at it as much. But in today's world, everything is connected to everything, because we've never figured out how to segment things, and that's unfortunate. But that's the world we live in, right? I challenge you, if you're listening and you work in an enterprise and you've got a micro-segmented or a reasonably segmented networks, 1999 called, write us, hit me on LinkedIn, leave a comment on the YouTube stream, someplace. Let me know somebody has done this, because I don't think anybody's good at it. And if we're not collectively good at it, then Eric, the minute you put a blind spot to lower your workload, you're beeped. Like, you're just beep, screwed, right? So I don't. I'd love to. I agree with what you're saying fundamentally on a principle level, but it doesn't make sense operationally because you're like, I'm just gonna.
Right? That's the craziness of the whole the world we're living in right now.
Yep.
Again, we're having vendors trying to sell us silver bullets so we can 10x our productivity. And to James's earlier point, if we're operators, like, okay, now they're doing 10x more connections. Like, is that what we really want, or do we want them working on the most important critical issues? Obviously, it's the latter, right? We want them working on the important issues. How do we give that to them?
And
I think we need them to understand it, though, right? I mean, that's the thing. Like your point to the board, you get 2 slides, you get 5 minutes. What does the board want to see? They want to see we blocked 8 bazillion attacks this month. Like that's the feel-good number that they understand that we did something, not the, hey, my team's running at 200% capacity, because that doesn't mean
James,
anything.
Stop making sense.
A lot of the boards I've had the chance to work with lately and encounter, like a lot of them are becoming more sophisticated. Like at my last role, there were 2 people on the board that ran security companies. Like there were CEOs of Cloudflare and Lacework and whatever. But I mean, they knew the questions to ask, and they held the chief trust officer accountable. I want to know X, Y, and Z because this matters. What your MTTD was yesterday, I don't care. Right? And more and more boards are becoming educated to this, just because there's the SOX regulations, there's the SEC, FTC, everybody else, and there's requirements around the CISO being able to explain to the board what we're doing in plain English. And so, hopefully, they want more. At the same time, it's up to us to actually figure out what can we show them that they want to hear. How can we talk the language of business like everybody else does? So the CISO does go in there and they do get their 20 or 30 minutes to go through the whole thing.
We haven't solved anything here. We've been talking for 47 minutes. We haven't solved a damn thing.
Yeah. I mean,
this is why
the
this is so
nature-
hard.
Yeah.
So I got a comment on LinkedIn. On YouTube chat from Jay, and he says, "Is it perhaps part of the problem that aside from MTTR, etc., which you pull from ticketing, SOC metrics are more of a reflection of the effectiveness of your individual programs, detections, and culture?"
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like every place is bespoke. They're all custom to themselves. They have their own process. They're trying to measure their own process.
Mm-hmm.
Again, there's no like SOC framework, best practices that come with metrics and everything else. That's like SRE teams have this. There's best practices. IT teams and help desks have best practices. It's kind of generic standard metrics they measure things against. Security, we're 20 years behind when that comes out to partner. We still cannot show the business outcomes we're delivering. We still cannot articulate the value we're bringing to the company, even though we're asking for tons of resources. And we can't actually articulate, again, the business outcomes we're delivering and how they impact the business, because we don't track them. Again, we're living 20 years in the past, though, and it's up to us to level ourselves up.
That's actually very much the vibe I'm getting pretty much from anybody, is that if you, in the same alert fatigue thing, if you talk to a SOC analyst or a SOC lead, take a time machine 20 years back, find a SOC analyst or a SOC lead, most of the discussion would actually make sense. Most of the problems will be vaguely similar. Most of the words they use, maybe less AI, but it's like my challenge. I don't have a time machine, sorry, but like it just feels like some of the conversations. I'm looking at vendor marketing slides, and I am getting flashbacks to my early net forensics days when people they made the same slides. And somebody had an audacity of asking me, Anton, you're telling me this slide is 2003 or 2023. How do you think we'll fare in 2043? And it's really kind of had me paralyzed. I'm usually a decent public speaker, but that froze me because I'm like, holy cow, don't tell me that in 2043 we'll be doing the same thing. No, God, no. But I couldn't answer anything else.
I'm sorry, but yes.
We've been doing the same thing for 25 years, so I might as well just keep going.
Why will tomorrow be any different?
Why are you doing this to me? No, you're supposed to be a support team and not like a cattle prod crew.
That point goes back to my rants on LinkedIn, Raph, that you mentioned earlier. Like, we keep doing the same thing, and who's benefiting from this? Well, the VCs are making a lot of money, the founders are getting rich, but again, to Anton's point, we're still in the same boat we were, except the conversations are the same, except you sprinkle some AI fairy dust in there maybe, but we're still in the same boat we were, 20 years ago when he was at Forensics, I was at SenseAge. I mean, way back in the day. We haven't gotten anywhere.
Isn't that why though? Like, people are making tons of money, everything's working fine. Don't rock the boat, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean,
like,
that's
I know
why
you had,
nothing
I know you
changes.
had Robert Henson on here a while back, my buddy Robert, and he articulates this really well when he compares it to the pharmaceutical industry. There's far more money in solving the symptoms and selling you Band-Aids than actually stopping the bleeding. And we're seeing that today. This is where the VCs keep feeding this repeat founders who will found 2, 3, 4, 5 companies. They'll get an exit. Someone giant company buys them, and then that product fades off into sunset because outside its original value that maybe the VCs help provide customers to them or whatnot, it's not actually solving a problem. It's a Band-Aid, and it's rinse and repeat. And this is where my main point was, where kind of the venture capitalists who are funding these tools and these companies, they are not aligned with our needs. What are our needs? Solving these problems, right? Getting out of alert fatigue, being able to manage, what we're looking at, being able to look at the most important things, yada, yada, yada. And they're coming to us with products that, they hope we're going to exit on. Their primary
I
motivation
think
is
it's another
money.
podcast, by the way. I think it's a great topic for not for 2 minutes though. I think it's gonna be we're gonna just like pile up, and then an hour later we'll be like,
Well, listen. At least now I have an idea for a series because this is going to be 623.
oh.
And if you guys want to, do this again, I had an idea. So as I don't know, I was writing in my tablet here as we were going through the whole what to throw away, what to review bucket. And I think I want to maybe somewhere in the next couple episodes, I want to tackle why the hell we still have false positives or why we still throw away alerts. Like I understand technically why we have them, but either we're calling them the wrong thing or we're not doing a very good job, or maybe both. So something for another time. All right. Well,
strong opinions on that topic as well.
I can't imagine you would have any. Hey, if you're listening and you're not one of the 5 people on this podcast, and you'd like to join the next one, I think if Anton comes back, Eric's going to come back. I think I can convince Anton to come back and talk about false positives. And so we'll take one more.
It's like a
What's that?
session for him.
This is therapy.
It's session for Anton. Yeah, it's the vent.
I jokingly said, you guys, a little while ago, I jokingly said, like, I want to do like on a standing Friday early afternoon Eastern time, a group therapy session. Just like whatever's going on in the security industry at that moment, just whoever wants, just jump in and we'll and we'll just talk through for an hour. Like, bring us your problems. Let's figure out how to solve them. But this, look, I get it. This has been definitely group therapy. But the problem is I don't feel any better about it than when we walked in. And in fact, aside from the fact that I knew what you were going to answer when I said, what is the job of a SOC? I hate that answer because it's too wide. Yeah. And I think the core function of a security operations team is to look at incoming threats, process them, and do something about them, right? But that as you get more work from other parts of IT, that little bit of work drowns under a growing mountain of crap that you shouldn't be doing, or at least not in that function. And then measuring it becomes just completely arbitrary and stupid. And then you get things like reports that say, like the DoD report that we all laughed at a couple of years ago. It was like 10 million attacks per day. You're like, you misspelled port scans, right? Like just silliness. And I'll challenge my other vendor colleagues that are out there that listen. Look, I'm guilty of this too, but I don't know that anybody does this any better. How do we show value? Like, how do we take whatever technology your customers bought from you or you're selling to them, and how do you make it so that you demonstrate more than 500 times the light blinked and 2 times you looked at it? Okay, well, maybe next time it'll be 3. Woo! Right? Like, how do you make sense of the things that are supposed to make sense? All right, let's go around because we're out of time, but I want to give kind of a final word. Jim, I'll start with you because you were the quietest on this, and that maybe
I have so many thoughts that I wanted to hear the rest of the team. I will just say is that we keep saying it over, and even yourself said it, is we're trying to solve problems. And fundamentally, we're not in a position to solve them because the problems are growing faster than we can sort of physically address them and what the business is willing to spend on it. And we're struggling with trying to come up with a way of presenting this real challenge that makes sense to a business, and it doesn't. And, you know, it's a huge problem, 100%.
James?
I would just say, you know, I think we have a big conflict between what the upper levels, the board, the CEO, even the CISO are looking for compared to what we're trying to actually solve in this. And I think it's that discrepancy that's causing a lot of the issues because we don't incentivize doing the stuff that we're talking about, right? We incentivize doing the status quo, right? That's where the money is. That's where I get to come in, I do my 9 to 5, everything's good. We check the box that security is something we're doing, but nobody ever really digs that far into it. Or, you know, we have a very few that are doing it. I think that's where, you know, it has to be almost a ground up approach where we have people like Erik and his teams that are like, hey, we need to solve this. And I'm going to start pushing you the stuff, you know, up that actually makes sense.
Anton, otherwise known as Captain Thunderkeys.
You know, to be honest, I'll just go very mellow in this case and point people to a recent blog by Ellie Mellon, my sort of colleague because she works at Forrester. She had this blog called An Actual Complete List of SOC Metrics. It's a little bit of a clickbait because it points to Forrester research that you have to pay for. But ultimately, the reason I'm doing this is because many analyst firms, many observers, consultants have looked at the problem over the course of the last 10 plus years, maybe 20, and created something useful. But to me, the adoption of this is kind of lagging sometimes, and even for simple things, even for, hey, let's look at more technical things like coverage of log sources by use cases or false positive ratios. Some of the things are useful and simple, and they don't always find good use. So that's a mild disagreement with Erik, where I agree that we lack in business metrics, but we don't lack in some good technical metrics that people actually don't use. And her blog is a good resource to point to some of the ideas you can use. That's where I would finish with.
And Erik, last but not least, you, because you don't want to hear me rant. I've got a whole thing that's got to just stay in the box for now because it'll last another hour.
You know, I like what James was saying before he leave us about how this has to be kind of a grounds up type thing, right? We know that, you know, the board, the CEO, even the CISO sometimes, they don't know what questions to ask of what they're actually looking for. What do they want to see? And so, like, people like me, people like Anton, like, we're leaning on our, you know, 30 years of experience doing this to start to think, this works, this doesn't. Okay, I'm going to start bubbling up what works. And hopefully it starts to resonate at the higher levels. And we're seeing that, you know, some things work, some things don't. And it's going to be a matter of trial and error to see how do we mature this, how do we grow up as a function. And it's going to be, again, on us to do it. Because if we're waiting around for someone to change the status quo for us, it's not going to happen, you know? So, I mean, we have to start the change from the bottom up, pushing it up. And hopefully, again, by the time it's, you know, 2044, 2043, we're not still where we are today. I'm going to chase.
All right, well, now Anton's dropped and James had to roll because we ran way too long. But guys, thanks, folks. Those of you guys that listen live, thanks for the chat. Thanks for listening. This is going to be a banger. Plus, I've got at least 2 more follow-ups from this. So, we're just going to call this the Fixing the SOC series, and maybe we have some intelligent discussions on this. At some point, I want to just get a group of vendors together and be like, all right, how do we do better? Because this sucks. So
it'll be interesting to get some VCs on here and ask them, like, what are your motivations on investing, your thesis is and whatnot, and you'll see it revolves around money. Right?
Have you not listened to the show?
Yeah. Have you not listened to the show? We just spent a whole bunch of time crapping on them. Okay. Hey, we just shit all over you. You want to come and talk to us?
A lot of them will. Like, they have
That's
thick
true.
skin. Let me tell you.
Yeah, that's fair. I know a couple that would do it. All right, folks. Thank you for listening. This has been episode 623, I think, of the Down to Security Rabbit Hole podcast. SOC metrics suck, and well, I don't know that we solved anything. We sure had some therapeutic times, and we got some follow-ups. As always, if you've got ideas, you want to leave your own thoughts, this will get posted live to the podcast soon. And I will catch you guys another time, another place on another Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. Like and subscribe. Ciao, y'all. Bye-bye then.